Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for joining the session. I hope everyone is in a good health and also safe wherever you are. What we want to do today is to discuss the final topic, topic 6 on Islamic banking and social finance. We have started the discussion in the last meeting, and I have talked about some features related to finance, and then we zoom into much detailed reason why when we say Islamic banking and finance, there is a need to establish the Islamic financial system. In the last discussion, we have seen also some crucial functions of the financial institutions. And when it comes to Islamic financial system, the main constraint is about the issue of riba that the Islamic financial institutions need to avoid, and therefore they need to find other ways to get revenue and generate profits. And among other ways is to charge fees and other sources of revenue which exclude riba. I have suggested this book for you to pick it up maybe later or whenever you have the time to read additional readings. This book is highly recommended. Also, in the discussion, we talk about the definition of riba that I mentioned. It is difficult to come up with a comprehensive technical definition because riba keeps changing or evolving from time to time and from place to place. Therefore, it is challenging for scholars to come up with a precise definition of riba. Nonetheless, we have seen some of the main technical definitions of riba. Last discussion, we also have established some reasons why riba is prohibited. I have shared a video about the effect of riba that creates the situation where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer based on this concept of how money would only move into one direction when the system is based on a riba system. And I think we will continue the discussion from this slide about the stages of the prohibition of riba. The majority famous opinion about the stages of the prohibition mention that riba has 4 stages of prohibition, and the following are the verses of Al-Quran referring to the stages of the prohibition. It started from Surah Ar-Rum, verse 39, and then the second stage is in Surah An-Nisa, verse 161. The third stage is in Surah Ali Imran, ayat 130. And the last stage of the prohibition is in Surah Al-Baqarah, covering few verses from verse 275 up until 281. I will go very briefly on each of these stages of prohibition. If you look at the first stage of the prohibition, this is a verse revealed in the second period where Allah mentioned about the evil of involving in riba transaction. And in this verse, Allah talks about the comparison between riba and sadaqah. It was customary among the people of the Jahiliyah Arabs, those who have a lot of money, they would lend the money to the people who in need of loan. Up until today also, that's a common practice. Those with money, surplus spending unit, put the money in the bank would channel that surplus money to those deficit. There are people who become slaves because of they cannot afford to repay the debts and the interest. And that's one way how people become slaves. In the history, people become slaves through many ways. And one of the common ways how people were trapped into slavery because their inability to repay their debts because of continuously increasing burden due to riba. So here you can see where Allah talks about the comparison between riba and zakah or sadaqah. Here Allah mentioned that zakah would increase wealth of those who give the charitable giving. And when this verse compares between riba and zakah, if you look at these two persons, if there are two people, the one that charge riba and the one that pays zakat, you can see these two people, they have different hearts. Their qalb, their hearts are very different. The one that charge riba, these people can be characterized as selfish, they are greedy, they would take advantage of other people's situation. The people who want to borrow money, they are in desperate situation. The one that can lend money, charge riba, they are of the advantageous position. And these people who charge riba take that advantageous position to exploit that situation. And the heart of the one that gives sadaqah, on the other hand, is full of compassion, sympathy. They are altruistic and they are happy to help other people. You can see here when Quran compares between riba and sadaqah, here Allah mentions about the reward, the reward of sadaqah. This is where we should expect the multiplied returns when we give sadaqah. We should have the yaqeen that will be the means how our wealth will be multiplied, not through not through riba. So here in the first stage is about moral denunciation of the practice of riba. It's not a direct prohibition. The first stage is not a direct prohibition. So this is just giving the moral compass for Muslim to restrain themselves from involving in riba transaction. The second stage of the prohibition, this is in Surah An-Nisa, and this verse, it's basically telling the Muslims about the prohibition of riba that was much earlier being imposed upon the Jews. The word here, they, right? This one refers to the Jews because this verse basically was revealed in Medina, and in Medina, Muslims had the direct encounter with Jews, and Jews, they are the people of the book, where the earlier scriptures, the book sent to Prophet Musa, to Prophet Isa, riba was already prohibited. Therefore, in this context, Allah tell Muslim about the disobedience of the Jews on the prohibition of riba. Right? So they devoured other people's property through riba. And therefore, what happens to them? Allah described them as وَأَعْتَدْنَا لِلْكَافِرِينَ مِنْهُمْ عَذَابًا أَلِيمًا. Because they disobeyed the prohibition of riba, then Allah called them as the people who kafir, ignorant people. Among them, they are kafir because they disobeyed the prohibition, and for them will be prepared a severe punishment. Now, this verse should give another strong warnings to Muslims to restrain themselves from practicing riba, because the people of the book earlier, like the Jews, they disobeyed this prohibition, and as a consequence, they will pay the heavy cost of that disobedience. Just to reflect, today we have Al-Quran, and in Al-Quran, riba is prohibited if Muslims disobey the prohibition of riba. We can ask ourselves, are we that different than these people described in this verse? The people of Kitab, like the Jews, who refuse to follow the command about riba. So this is a very serious warning to Muslims. The third stage, this is where direct prohibitions comes. The direct prohibitions come in the third stage in Surah Al-Imran. But Allah described the riba here to riba an-nasi'ah, a specific type of riba transaction practiced by the Arabs of that time. This is where, in this verse, Allah called the believer, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, la ta'kulu riba, this one, ad'afa mudha'afah. Or the English translation is double and multiply. Because the practice of that time was that whenever a lender lends some money to the borrower, he would tell the borrower, you must pay that money after, for example, 1 month. And when the time is due, the borrower came to pay, and the lender would say to the borrower, if you like, I can extend for another period, like for another month, for example. But when you want to pay, it's double. So that's where double. And when the second period to pay was due and the borrower came to pay the double payment now, then the lender would say, no problem, if you want to extend further, then you now need to pay double of that. So then it's become multiplied. So this is the type of practice done before. That's where the word ad'afa mudha'afa here was mentioned. So this is an exorbitant amount charge, right? And here Allah closed the verse with, right, wattaqullaha la'allakum tuflihun. Therefore, what we also can extract from this verse is that abstaining ourselves from involving in riba transaction is one way to achieve al-falah. Avoiding riba, fearful of the punishment or the threat because of the riba sin, is a form of taqwa. We avoid riba because we fear Allah Ta'ala. We fear of His punishment. That's a form of taqwa. And this taqwa, of obeying the command not to practice riba, inshallah will lead us to achieving al-falah. If you can recall, Akram Khan in his conditions of falah, one of the economic conditions of falah is to avoid riba. And the last stage of prohibitions, this is a series of verses of Al-Quran, and this is where you have the famously quoted verse where we say, Ahallallahu al-bay' wa harrama riba, but Allah has permitted trade and prohibited riba, as I underline here. There is a comparison between trade and riba. If you can recall my discussion earlier on the missing element of iwab in riba transaction, in that discussion, I compare between trade and riba. We can see that in trade there is market risk taken by the trader, and that is also value added in trade. While in riba, that value added is missing. And in this series of verse also, Allah mentions about the need for us to giving up riba, because as mentioned in verse 279 over here, if we don't give up riba, take notice of war from Allah and His Messenger. This one. The declaration of war by Allah and His Messenger against those people who practice riba. Give it up. That's Allah's command. Stop it. Otherwise, get ready for the war between you and Allah and His Messenger. So that's a very, very strong warning against riba transaction. So those are some of the stages, the 4 stages of the prohibition of riba. Just like the prohibition of alcoholic drink is come in stages. Ulama discuss why the prohibitions come in stages. Definitely among other wisdom is to prepare the Muslims about before full prohibitions come, there should be some transition period so that they can adjust their lifestyle, the economy will not be affected and so on. That's among other reasons given. But Islam was already well established since the death of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Therefore, in our time, due to colonization, many Muslim countries' economies stuck in riba economic system. We are still in the transition process to move away from the modern system of riba to the modern Islamic financial system. And that's where you should be the next generation to improve further the state of art in the Islamic banking and finance. Moving to this one, types of riba. In general, the easiest categorization is to divide riba into these 2 categories. The first one is, we call it as riba an-nasi'ah, or sometimes it is also referred as riba al-Quran, because the prohibitions come in Al-Quran, in particular the 3rd stage of the prohibition in Surah Ali Imran. And it is also sometimes referred to as riba al-jahiliyah, because in that 3rd stage of prohibition, la ta'kulu riba ad'afa mudha'afah, it refers to the type of riba transaction practiced by the Arabs of that time, the pagans Arab of that time. So riba an-nasi'ah or riba al-Quran or riba al-jahiliyah. The main features of this riba is that it involves time deferment, delay in payment by the borrower to the lender. Because of the delay, there is the time factor. Like when you calculate, when you learn finance, there is present value calculation, future value calculation, right? And in that formula, there is this thing, T, the time factor. And because of delay in the payment, T, and plus the interest therefore creates what we call earlier the positive time value of money. I talked about the positive time value of money in my last lecture. So because of that, the borrower is burdened to pay more over time. And riba an-nasi'ah, basically the main features involve extra charges or excess in the payment because of the deferment because of the delay. The second type of riba, by the way, still on riba an-nasi'ah here, the loan that many people today usually get from the conventional bank, that's in general can be categorized as riba an-nasi'ah. In general, we can say because of the time factor, that's an element of riba an-nasi'ah. Another category of riba is known as riba al-fadl. And riba al-fadl basically occurs in barter transaction. Inherent here means usually you will find this type of riba would occur in a barter transaction. Specifically, this barter transaction would involve the ribawi items. There are 6 ribawi items. There are few hadiths talking about these 6 ribawi items. You may come across some hadiths that will not have the complete 6 ribawi items, but there are other hadiths that will give you the 6 items. But in general, you will find the hadith of Prophet SAW would talk about 6 ribawi item. And this is one example of the hadith that you can see talking about the 6 ribawi item. Right? The first one is gold. So gold for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, barley for barley, dates for dates. And then there is another continuation of this. Some other would add sats for sats. Therefore, this is where, right, you can get the 6 items. Sats also is there in this hadith, right? And what you find, the conditions of when you want to barter these 6 items, it should be like for like and hand to hand. Like for like and hand to hand. The Arabic term here is this one. Illa mislam bimislin yadam biyadin. This is another hadith that's also involved the 6 ribawi items. Just to show you, there are various hadiths like this. Now, riba al-fadl is slightly confusing to many people to understand how the riba would exist in the barter exchange. Here I want to explain the principle how riba al-fadl could occur. To understand how riba al-fadl could occur, first, let's understand the illah of the prohibition. There are 6 items. And there are 2 illah. Illah is the criteria that would, in short, illah is a criteria. That's easier to understand. Or some would say the root cause. But for the 6 ribawi item, there are 2 illah. The first one, for gold and silver, they function as money, and they also function as the price, unit of price, right? Or unit of measure. So this is one illah. When something becomes money, that's the illah. And the second one, for other than gold and silver, therefore, it's involved wheat, barley, dates and salts. In general, these are considered as food item. Definitely, if you read more fiqh discussion, they would even consider some other characteristics of this food item. They are weight, most of them are uncountable. You need to weight them and so on and so forth. But in general, these are food items. All right. So remember, there are 2 illah when it's come to the 6 ribawi items. Now, riba al-fadl could occur in the exchange of the 6 ribawi items, and in order to avoid riba al-fadl, when you exchange the items with the same illah, this one is important, and they are of the same types, same illah, same types, you need to fulfill 3 conditions. Same illah, same types. How that could occur? For example, gold and gold, silver and silver. Right? Gold is one type, silver is another type, wheat is another type. So in general, when we say types here, there are 6 types, referring to the 6 ribawi items. How many illah do we have? Only 2. So when we want to exchange the items of the same illah and same types, basically we are talking about exchanging like gold and gold, wheat for wheat, and so on. Right? So there are 3 conditions that you need to fulfill. This is the Arabic term. I make it much simpler. The first one, when we say the mumassalah, is referred to the exchange should be of equal measure. You cannot exchange gold for gold with different measure. In this example, 3 grams of gold, and you want to exchange for 3.1 gram of gold. That extra is considered as riba al-fadl. So in order to avoid riba al-fadl, exchange of gold and gold must be of equal value. The second condition, al-hulul here refers to it should be in the same majlis. You need to do it in the same majlis. For example, in this case, right, you want to exchange 3 kilogram wheat for another 3 kilogram wheat. But the other extra, the counter 3 kilogram wheat is not there yet. It's not in that majlis. This cannot be done. If you continue with this practice, with this transaction, it fails the second conditions. Therefore, it triggers riba al-fadl in that context. And the third one, it should be done hand to hand, spot transaction. You need to deliver that items immediately. So these are the 3 conditions when we talk about exchange of the ribawi items of the same illah and same types. However, if you want to exchange the ribawi items of the same illah but of different types, same illah, gold and silver, they are of the same illah. They are money. Both of them are money, but they are different types. The first type is silver, the second type is gold. Wheat and barley is another example. They are the same illah, they are food, but they are different types. Right? In this context, you need to fulfill only 2 conditions. Number 1, it should be done in the same majlis and spot exchange. Spot exchange. So therefore, in this context, it is permissible, allowed to sell 3 gram gold with 4 gram silver. You can do this as long as you done it in the same majlis and you deliver immediately. The transaction, the items is delivered on the spot. All right. So this is what I have, this matrix, to summarize that conditions. To understand riba al-fadl, I divide. So the first part, let's look at this matrix to understand further. This will summarize, right, that discussion. Here, I have the illah. There are 2 illah only for the 6 ribawi item. Either they are money or they are food. So this illah can be same illah or different illah. All right. And then on this side, we have types. And there are 6 types. 6 items equal to 6 types. And the exchange can be of the same types like gold and gold, or different types like gold and silver, gold and barley, and so on, right? So let's understand this matrix. Let's look at the first box here, this one. In this, the first box here, the first matrix here, it refers to the case where we talk about items of the same illah and the same types. Here, example like exchange of gold for gold, wheat for wheat, salt for salt, dates for dates. And in that context, you can avoid riba al-fadl as long as you fulfill the three conditions that I have mentioned earlier. All right, the three conditions that I have mentioned earlier. They should be of equal measure in the same majlis, spot transaction. Then no problem. There will be no riba. If you fail any of the three conditions, there is high possibility of riba al-fadl to be present in that transaction. All right, I hope that's clear. Now, the second box here refers to a case where the exchange involve ribawi items of the same illah but different types. Same illah. What do we mean by same illah? Illah can be either money or food. For example, you want to exchange gold for silver. Gold and silver are the same illah, money, but they are different types. Another possibility like wheat and barley. Same illah, food, but different types. In that context, you can avoid riba al-fadl as long as you fulfill the two conditions, as I have mentioned in the two slides earlier. So this is clear earlier, right? Now, there is a third possibility where an exchange could also happen across the 6 ribawi items involving different illah and different types. Gold and wheat, for example. Gold is one type, wheat is another type, different illah. Gold, the illah is money, wheat is the illah is food. So in that conditions, gold and wheat, as I mentioned here, right? In that case, silver and dates is another example. In that case, this exchange involves no riba at all. You can exchange, for example, the third one here is just like a normal sale purchase transaction. You know, when I have my gold as my money, you have wheat that I want to buy, I can hand you my gold and you give me the wheat that I want to purchase. So here, this is just a normal transaction, all right? So no riba in this case, all right? And the fourth one, this is impossible to occur. You cannot have a case of different illah but same types. This will never, cannot find any position like that. So this is a matrix that I hope can help you to basically unfold any confusion about riba al-fadl. Now, let's look at some application of riba al-fadl when we understand this diagram. The common one is, the first example I want to give is the case where we have money exchange between gold and silver. Okay, this is not a problem. Gold and silver, as long as gold is the same illah with silver, but they are of different types. If you look at my box here, gold and silver, same illah, but different types. Just make sure you fulfill the two conditions. That's it. You need to do it on the spot and in the same majlis. And here, right, for the first one also, I can relate to an exchange involving the normal currency exchange. For example, you want to exchange ringgit Malaysia to US dollar. RM is one type, US dollar is another type. What's the ilah of these two? They are both money. So if you want to exchange ringgit to dollar, you need to fulfill only two conditions here. This one. You need to give your ringgit to the money exchanger, and that money exchanger should hand over to you the dollar immediately after that. You cannot do this. You cannot do this. Otherwise, riba al-fadl will happen. Like CIMB, they have this facility. You can order US dollar, like you transfer your ringgit, but you will pick up that dollar when you arrive at the airport, maybe after 1 week or tomorrow, whatever. They have that. That's not allowed because it's not in the spot and it's not in the same majlis. I hope that's clear. That one cannot. So that's one common situation we can see the application of riba al-fadl. Here I have just to, sometimes people ask me very weird question, can I exchange this thing with this thing? For example, wheat and cabbage. This is not an issue, right? It's not an issue as long as you do it on the spot transaction. Hopefully that matrix would help you to unfold any confusion about riba al-fadl. Now, here are some other lists related to names of riba. Usually these are more common among the Shafi'is. You may encounter all these categories. For example, riba al-fadl, we have discussed this, but among the sub-categories of this, depending on how the transaction is undertaken, the items involved. For example, you have riba al-nasa, riba al-qard, and many other types. I remember there are many other versions that can be quite difficult to understand and so on. Actually, it's not difficult to understand as long as you understand the basic principle like the one matrix I have shared with you, you should be fine. Once we understand the nature of riba, the possibility of riba, here I'm going on this very quickly. The Islamic banking and finance, they need to have a system without riba. So what happened in the Islamic financial system is the efforts to replace transaction with riba with other contracts. Replacing riba based contract with non-riba based contract. And there are two types of contracts used as follows. The first one is debt or trade financing contracts, and the second one is equity financing contracts. Yeah, they also have other contracts like ijarah, also famous. Ijarah is renting contracts. However, here I want to focus more on these two types of contract because banks, Islamic bank, for example, usually they involve in giving loans. Loans can be either consumer loans. Example of consumer loans like you want to buy car loan, housing loan, personal loan, computer loan. Those are example of consumer loans, right? Consumer banking. And another type of loans involve business loan. Investment banking usually involve this type of loans, where usually we talk about equity financing, equity contract financing. For the debt-based or trade-based contract financing, the two famous ones are murabahah contract and baik bitaman ajil. While for the equity contract, we have musyarakah and mudarabah. So these are the two general types of contracts used by the Islamic bank. Murabahah. Oh, this one, this H should be here. I don't realize that. Murabahah is just a sales purchase contract. It's just a normal sales purchase contract. While baik bitaman ajil, usually it refers to a deferred payment sales contract. Bank Mu'ajjal is another name for this. So Islamic financial system or Islamic bank, for example, would use BBA, Bank Bitaman Ajil, for example, to issue or to give you car loan. Let's see how this is done. And here, I want to show you the case where you want to apply for a housing loan. When you want to buy a house, there is the developer of the house, the contractor, and then you as the client, all right? And the third party here is the Islamic bank or Bank Islam. Let's say you want to buy the house and the price of the house is 500,000. RM 500K. That's the price. What happened is that you need to pay the down payment to the developer. And this down payment, why it is underlined here? DOWN. I'm not sure why it's underlined like that. You need to pay the down payment, and in Malaysia, usually the down payment required is about 10%. 500,000, 10% down payment, you need to have with you about 50,000K for the down payment if the house is 500,000. Now you are short of 450,000. You need another 450K to complete the transaction with the developer. So what happened? You approach the Islamic bank. You tell Islamic bank that this is what the house you want to buy. This is the price. Islamic bank will evaluate your credit. And then if they find you are credit worthy, you can pay the installment and so on. They approve your loan, your housing loan. And the contract involved for that loan is like this. You would, look at the second step here. You will sell the house to the bank. You will sell the remaining balance of the house to the bank. In other words, Bank Islam would buy the house from you for this one, transaction 2, at how much? 450K. You sell the house to Bank Islam at 450K. And the third transaction is when Bank Islam will sell back the house to you at this price, 450K plus the profit margin. This profit margin sometimes is in percentage and so on. Usually they will benchmark this against the interest rate also. So, Bank Islam in step 3, sell back the house to you, 450K plus the profit margin that the bank wants. So what happened after this steps 2 and 3 completed? You get your house. So client get the house that they really want to buy and stay in. Client also would get the money. How much? RM 450K, where this money basically, theoretically speaking, is paid to the developer. Developer is happy because now developer completed selling the house to you. You get the house, developer get the money at 450K. Banks also would be happy because bank gets this profit margin. So that's what happened. Here, you can see the application of Murabahah and Bank Bitaman Ajil. Murabahah occur in step 2. This is Murabahah. You sell the house to bank, bank pay you 450K. Bank Bitaman Ajil occur in step 3. where bank sell back the house to you 450k plus the profit margin. You will pay this house to the bank over certain period of time, installment payment. All right. You know, in step two, just to reverse a bit, in step two, you are selling the house to the bank. Actually, the bank has no need to own that house. So what happened? Bank will then sell back to you the house. You are the one that need the house. You need the loan. Right? So this is actually step 2 and 3, 2 plus 3. This is also known as Bay al-Innah. All right. This is also known as Bay al-Innah. Now they have Tawaro and Bay al-Innah. There's slight different. Is either you use the second party, third party. That's just the main difference between the two contracts. But for your information, Bay al-Innah, Tawaro transaction basically involve these 2 and 3 steps. Step 2 and 3. And scholars are not, among the Muslim scholars, some are not very keen on doing these types of transaction because, for example here, Bank Islam has no intention actually to own the house. It's just to facilitate giving you the money that you need and charge you the profit margin. So that's quite controversial, and up until now you can find debates related to this issue. But here I just want to tell you some of the process in the application of murabahah and bai' bitaman ajil. And here I have described to you the debt or trade financing contract. I hope that's clear. What's the difference with a conventional loan if you want to buy a house? In a conventional loan, where should I write? Maybe I delete first. Okay. I will use some space here. In a conventional loan, you have the developer. Okay, let's say this is the developer. Let's say now this is another person, the one that doesn't care Islamic or not. And then you have Citibank. Citibank, just to denote, this is a conventional bank. Okay. So you go to the developer, this person goes to the developer wanting to buy the house, pay the down payment, D for down payment. Now he needs 450k. He would approach his bank, Citibank, applying for the housing loan. What Citibank will do is, Citibank will evaluate his credit worthiness. If he is someone who the bank believes can pay the installment, the bank will approve the loan plus interest. It's just 450k plus interest rate. In this case, the bank, Citibank, just concerned about the interest and the loan. All right. There is no sales purchase or whatsoever. It's just purely a loan transaction with interest. For Islamic bank, at least for 2 and 3 here, you can see this involves sales contract. All right. So that's the main difference. Sales trade is allowed in Islam. Riba is prohibited. So this is one way how the Islamic financial system avoid interest. Over here, this is an example of equity financing. Equity financing. Usually, equity financing is used for business. You want to accept a business entity, you don't have the money, then you approach Islamic bank for loan. So here you have equity financing. Equity financing either musyarakah or mudarabah. All right. Over here, I have a diagram to show a case of a musyarakah contract. We have 3 parties here. The financier, the bank basically, which later will become your partner if the bank approves your application, your business application. And then this is you actually, the partner, right? Not SME, not yet an MSME. SME is here. SME stands for small medium enterprise. Just an example, this joint venture is a small medium enterprise joint venture. So if you have an idea to set a new business, you will approach this partner, the bank in this example, where you invite the bank, or even not the bank, even if your other friends that like to join your business, we can apply this contract, where in this case, that partner will share the financial and also human capital investment over here, right? This musyarakah would involve financial and human capital investment like skills, knowledge, and so on. And you also will share some of your financial capital and your human capital investment. You will present the proposal, and if the other partner agrees, then you will both will form this joint venture. It's a business. And in this joint venture, what is important is to have what we call the profit and loss sharing ratio set clearly. How you want to share the risk and the profit. 50-50, 30-70, 80-20, depends on the agreement in the contract. In this case, in the case of the joint venture makes profit, then this profit will be shared according to the profit ratio. So both parties will get the profit. However, if there is a loss incurred by the joint venture, then loss also will be incurred by both parties in terms of financial loss and also the human capital loss. What is an example of human capital loss? For example, the efforts that you have put down to run the business, or just, the business fails, you have to close down your business. Those are efforts gone. And that's very painful. That's a kind of risk you have to incur and a form of loss incurred in this joint venture. So this is an example of musyarakah. One version of equity financing. The other version of equity financing involves mudarabah. In mudarabah, you have the capital provider, Rabul Mal. Capital provider is Rabul Mal. And the entrepreneur, the one that will put his efforts, her efforts, or mudarrib. And again, this mudarrib, the entrepreneur would present the proposal to this partner to form this joint venture. In mudarabah contract, the Rabul Mal basically would contribute the financial capital, the money needed, while the mudarrib will provide the human capital, the efforts. Like venture capitalist case. Sometimes you need to pitch your case. You have good ideas, but you don't have the money. You are willing to work hard to set a business. You need people to invest, put money, believe in the project, and so you pitch the project. So that's the idea of mudarabah. Again, in this joint venture contract, you need to set the profit and loss sharing ratio. So what happened here, if the business makes profit, this profit will be shared according to the ratio. No problem. Loss, in the case of loss, the capital provider, Rabul Mal, would lose the financial, would incur the financial loss. Maybe total capital loss, partial capital loss, depends. While the mudarrib would lose the human capital. So it is wrong, because I have seen many students say that in mudarabah only the Rabul Mal would bear the loss. That's very, very big mistake for you to make that statement. In mudarabah, both parties would incur some kind of losses. The Rabul Mal would incur the financial loss. The Mudarib, the entrepreneur, would incur the human capital loss. Which one is much greater? It depends. Sometimes human capital loss can be much more painful. For example, imagine you put a lot of efforts for your business and then you have to shut down the business because it fails. It's very frustrating emotionally. It's very tiring physically. Right? So that's a kind of loss incurred by the entrepreneur. Don't overlook how, don't think that this is nothing compared to losing money. Right? Just imagine you work hard for this semester to get good results for your course, but then you fail the course. You feel frustrated. Why? Because one semester effort just is failed. That's some people say, if I can pay to pass, right? So you don't care about finance, money at that point because you value more of the efforts. So I remind you, don't say that in Mudarabah, only capital provider Rabul Mal bear the loss. That's mistake. That's a mistake. Another thing commonly mentioned by students, which I think very not very correct. People, I have found even slides by some lecturers mention that in Mudarabah, the Rabul Mal capital provider would not intervene in the management of the business. I think that's is overstatement. That's a statement without proper, careful consideration. Let's say you provide capital to this joint venture. And in Mudarabah, yes, sometimes you say to the Mudarib or the entrepreneur, you run the business. I don't want to involve in the management. You may say that. But that doesn't mean you don't want to know at all about that business, the operation. As capital provider, it is not wise for the capital provider just to leave, to inject money and say, I don't want to know anything about the business. You run it. I just want to get profit later. That's very unwise. I use the much more polite term, unwise on this part, right? The wise investor, because Rabul Mal is an investor in this context, investor would always want to know what's going on with the business. There are meetings where investors would sit and decide on the management. All right, that's why in business you have the board of directors. Yeah, you have the CEO. You can imagine CEO can be the Mudarib. But board of directors sometimes can overrule decision made by the CEO. All right. So don't say that. For me, if you write in the exam, in Mudarabah, Rabul Mal has nothing to do with the management, something like that. I've seen many times students, even in slide, I see you get it from some finance slide and whatnot. That's wrong, that's wrong. I put money in a business, definitely I want to know at least a report, what's going on. I come to the meeting, I will voice my concern and so on. I still involved to a certain extent in the management of that business. Okay. So these are some other aspect of comparison between debt financing and equity financing contracts. Here, we are doing the comparison to see the popularity between equity financing and debt financing in terms of how the Islamic financial system, which one Islamic financial institution like most. Definitely, the answer is Islamic financial system, they like debt financing more than equity financing. Islamic economists prefer equity financing more for the Islamic financial institutions to do. But in practice, it's different. Why? Because to Islamic financial institutions, that financing is better to their businesses due to the low risk to the banks, to the Islamic bank. Equity financing is high risk. High risk because, for example, Mudarabah, Islamic bank need to monitor so many projects in Mudarabah. The success of the project is not guaranteed. While in sales purchase contract like car loan, housing loan done by Islamic bank, that's low risk, right? Because steady income stream, as long as people keeps paying their loan, bank will get the money plus the profit. But in equity financing, subject to profit or loss of the joint venture. This one also, debt financing is short term, while equity financing involves longer periods. However, for economists, I continue with the next point. Low management cost to the bank to run debt financing because the bank officers just need to monitor constant payment by the borrower, while in the equity financing contract, high management cost to the bank because bank needs to have officers to monitor each project if they agree on the joint venture. Among the Islamic economists, they prefer equity financing among other reasons because of the big impact to the economy. All right, because for Islamic economists, the debt financing contract has low impact to the economy because bank only plays the role of a middleman. Low impact here for debt financing because bank plays the role of middleman. So here you can see why Islamic economists prefer equity financing more than debt financing. Why Islamic economists prefer equity financing than debt financing? These are the quick points on that. Economic growth, because equity financing means real economic activities that would stimulate real economy. Joint ventures are formed, new businesses being established, and therefore that's what creates employment in the economy. More people will participate in the economy. The wholesales, the suppliers, the customers, all will benefit from this joint venture being established. And then productivity also being revived under the equity financing because you are creating real outputs, not a third party like debt financing, where bank only play the third party, charge more in between of two parties. So that is a real value added in the economy. All right. So that's about the business involving Islamic banking, how they avoid riba. These are some quick points related to controversies underlying murabahah and mudarabah. I leave this to you. I will share a video on Islamic social finance later, maybe in the next class. All right. I think that's about it today.